Welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. Today is Wednesday, October 21st, 2020, and today we are bringing you an urgent dispatch from a front line of the struggle to stop what is a rolling coup by the Trump-Pence fascist regime that is already stealing the election. My name is Andy Z. I'm the host of the show, and my co-host, Sunsara Taylor, is in Washington, D.C., where we are just 48 hours away, potentially, of the ramming through of Amy Coney Barrett as a justice of the Supreme Court, a ramming through that we must stop. Yesterday, Sunsara recorded a dispatch from in front of the Supreme Court that we want all of you to hear, and that is the reason to speed this dispatch to you today. And we're going to be postponing our regular Thursday night show because there's a number of things happening on Thursday evening, and we're going to have our next episode appear, full episode appear on Monday, the 26th of October. So tonight, in addition to the centerpiece of our show, which is this dispatch from Sunsara Taylor, we're going to bring you an important announcement of the 25th National Day to protest police brutality, repression, and the criminalization of a generation. And also, we're going to be bringing you the premiere showing of the reading of a pledge by Refuse Fascism to the people of the world that was read by Lilly Wachowski, who is the co-creator of Matrix and V for Vendetta and the series Sense8. So it's a very beautiful rendition of this pledge. So before going to some of the key segments from this dispatch, there are a few things that we want to say about this moment. I'm recording this just 2 weeks away from election night, at a time when probably the returns may start to come in. Many people have said, and they're right, that this is the most momentous election in the history of this country, perhaps ever, although maybe some people may make an exception for the 1860 election, which, if you recall from your history books, preceded the Civil War. And for the last 2.5 months, the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show has been going deeply into the nature of the danger humanity faces from the Trump-Pence fascist regime and the urgent need for people to take to the streets day after day in sustained nonviolent protest that demands that this regime be removed from office now. We've brought you a statement from Bob Avakian on August 1st on the immediate critical situation, the urgent need to drive out the Trump-Pence regime, voting in this election, and the fundamental need for revolution. And we've brought you the 3-part series that he wrote. Voting will not be enough. We need to take to the streets and stay in the streets, demanding Trump-Pence out now. These 2 works are essential guidance and analysis of how we got here, what we actually face, and how we have to struggle against it in this extraordinary moment in history. So you need to read these. You can see them on revcom.us. You should watch the episodes that we've put up of the RNL show over the past 5 or 6 weeks. We've gone deeply into these. We've illustrated them. We've discussed them. This is very important stuff. Also, the RNL show has brought you the movement that's titled Out Now, Trump-Pence Out Now, by the organization Refuse Fascism, of which Sunsara and I are both initiators. You can find incredible segments and episodes illustrating this movement on the previous episodes. But before we go to Sunsara's commentary, which is the centerpiece of the show, as I said, on the impending vote on the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett, we want to say a few things to all of you tonight. I want to start here. First off, let's just clarify all this bullshit that we hear about President Trump and how he's not being presidential. And to speak to this, I'll give you Bob Avakian, who kicks some science on how to view Donald J. Trump.
Only someone worse than a fool would want that racist, Confederacy-loving, white supremacist, pussy-grabbing, misogynistic, male supremacist, LGBT-bashing, rights-trampling, science-denying, environment-destroying, warmongering, xenophobic, America-first, blood-sucking, fascist motherfucker Trump to get reelected.
That was Bob Avakian in a short rant, Worse Than a Fool. This Saturday, October 24th, 10 days before the election, Refuse Fascism has called for mass public protest assemblies. You must be there. It's maybe a cliche to say you need to build for these assemblies, you need to be at these assemblies, just like the future of humanity depends on it, because it does. Well, that's a cliche because it has some truth in it. Because it's actually true that the future does depend on what all of you, what millions of people do. These mass public assemblies are called under the slogan, Trump is already stealing the election. We need to vote, but Trump will not be stopped by voting. Trump is already stealing the election. In Georgia, black people had to wait for 11 hours to be able to vote, while in the white precincts, people went right through the lines. All over the country, there's voter intimidation, restrictions on voting. But all of this is part of a more thorough plan, a full plan to steal this election should Trump lose, which is actually not a foregone conclusion, despite what you hear from the polls. And part of what we actually have to do now is, by being in the streets, is not just have this be a one-sided thing with all these MAGA thugs marauding around, Trump rallies and all this stuff in the press constantly repeating what Trump is doing and saying, don't worry, Biden's got this, which is leaving you all passive. But Refuse Fascism, as I said, is called this a rolling coup because by the time we get to elections, Trump is going to, and he's losing this election, Trump is going to declare that it's been rigged, it's been fixed. He's going to sow confusion. They're going to do all kinds of things on that fascist news network, Fox TV. They're going to take things into the courts and into the legislature, so they're going to challenge this. At the same time they're doing this, their fascist base with their cami uniforms, their caravans, they'll be out in the streets, see? And his plan, and this is what's behind the urgency of ramming through this nomination of Amy Coney Barrett, is so that he has a clear majority in the Supreme Court, where he's hoping this will end up and that it will throw the election to him. She, on the Supreme Court, is there and being put there now to seal the deal of the theft of an election. So why do we need to be in the streets now, which is the main thing I want to bring into the conversation right now? Because we are not facing a situation where, as Biden says, the votes will be counted and whoever gets the most votes is going to be president. That's not what these people are planning for. They are staging an actual rolling coup. Sunsara is going to run down in her commentary how this is taking shape in the hearings that have been going on in Washington over the rubber stamp of a confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett. And I do want to say right here that it's very important, even in the 48 hours that are left, that we oppose this nomination. And I'm going to say something more about that in a second. Listen, coups, when they happen around the world, the thefts of power are stopped when people plan and when they act before the coup. And they are in the streets and they build the unity, the determination, and they establish the righteousness of their cause before the people of the world. This is what puts the pressure on those in the powers that be who are opposed to the coup. This is what puts pressure on the whole system when we are on the streets. Just consider this. The governor of Michigan, a plot was foiled, apparently. We don't know all the details of this, but a plot was foiled to kidnap the governor of Michigan and do her great harm. And in Trump's recent rally, rather than condemn that coup, he gave it his support. The audience started chanting, "Lock her up," and he said,
"Lock them all up."
Lock them all up at the very moment that he's also pressuring his fascist attorney general, who's not fascist enough for Trump, to indict Biden, Obama's son. Why am I going into this? This should tell you how serious they are about stealing this election. And so, yes, we should vote in massive numbers so that when he starts to steal this election, people will see it as totally illegitimate and will be in the streets and more people will come join us. But if we're not already in the streets, they can't join us. We have to be in the streets now. Look, every step of the way, the Democratic Party has showed you that they will conciliate and collaborate. I'm not going to take the time now to walk through all the different things that have happened over 3 years, including the impeachment trial and including what Sunsara is going to tell you about these confirmation hearings. But if we want things to change, if we are in the streets, and I say in the streets, I don't mean just a few of us in the streets, but if masses of people are in the streets and with one unifying demand, Trump Pence out now. Yes, we should go and different things that are happening with votes are being counted here or there. People should be in front of them. But there has to be a single demand that we're not going to be thrown off course by some claims by some election commission that Trump really won this, because fascism is always illegitimate and they've been stealing the election and packing the courts all along. If we do this, the Democrats, who themselves, as I said, are under fire from this regime, under threat from this regime, they can be moved to act if there's that pressure from below that gives them the legitimacy to change what they were starting to do, which would be conciliate, to actually standing up against it. And listen, the last point I want to make about this is when we took to the streets, millions of people, after the brutal, wanton murder of George Floyd in the movement for Black Lives Matter, you changed a tremendous amount. Never before were politicians all over the place saying, yes, this is a country founded on white supremacy. This was not discourse until you did what you did. You had a situation where Trump pulled this PR stunt that actually brutalized people in Lafayette Park to stand in front of a church with his Bible upside down. And the top military officer who serves under the commander-in-chief, who is Donald Trump, the next day or in the days after apologized for having cleared that ground for Trump and for being there and criticized the commander-in-chief. This is unprecedented, and that's because of the power that you had in the streets. So if we're out in the streets in massive numbers now, building even more numbers as we approach the time of the election, then we can make history and not this theft of an election. The last thing I want to say about this is even if we start with a few people, the more that we get clear on if you have that bone-deep hatred of Trump, if you think what's been going on is just immoral and wrong, or if you agree with what we're talking about here, that this is a fascist regime, all of that should impel you and inspire you to be out in the streets now, building that unity, building our ways to work together, learning how to do that, increasing our numbers, and again, projecting to the world the justice of our cause, we could win. And that's what's happening on Saturday. This Saturday, mass public protest meetings around the country where we're going to get into this. Hopefully in our hundreds of people, we're going to get into it deeply. We're going to stand up against that. In some cities, we'll have marches. In other cities, there'll be different kinds of things that people will do. This is a time to take a stand in these assemblies and in other ways. Use your imagination. There's many ways to make your point. So with that, I want to go to Sunsara Taylor, who's recorded this segment in Washington, D.C., in front of the Supreme Court.
Hi, this is Sunsara Taylor, reporting for the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show here in Washington, D.C. during the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, there are a million reasons to oppose this confirmation, to pour into the streets and demand that it not go forward. The fact that Amy Coney Barrett would tip the highest court in the land, this Supreme Court, towards a pro-fascist, pro-theocratic majority, to become a court hostile to the rights of women, to control their own bodies and reproduction, hostile to abortion rights and even birth control, hostile to the rights of LGBTQ people, hostile to voting rights, and so much more. But the most immediate and acute reason, the most immediate danger of this confirmation is that Donald Trump has openly declared that it is part of his attempt to steal the upcoming election, to carry out a coup in the service of locking in place a fascist America. He has said openly that he wants to fill this Supreme Court seat in record time before the election because he wants to be able to throw the election to the courts and have them rule in his favor should the election be contested.
I think this will end up in the Supreme Court, and I think it's very important that we have 9 justices.
And meanwhile, he's doing everything in his power right now, every day, to contest this election already. He's declared mail-in votes fraudulent against all evidence during a pandemic. He's called for an army of ex-military and ex-police to go to the voting polls to intimidate in Democrat-run cities. And almost every day he is refusing to promise a peaceful transfer of power. He's made clear that he does not intend to leave office, regardless of the ballot count, and he's told you that he wants this Supreme Court seat filled as part of that fascist coup. And for her part, during the confirmation hearings, Amy Coney Barrett has given us every reason to believe that she will be a willing accomplice and instrument of this election theft. She too refused to endorse a peaceful transfer of power.
Do you believe that every president should make a commitment, unequivocally and resolutely, to the peaceful transfer of power?
Well, Senator, that seems to me to be pulling me in a little bit into this question of whether the president has said that he would not peacefully leave office.
She refused to state that armed voter intimidation at the ballot places is illegal.
A contractor from outside of my state of Minnesota started recruiting poll watchers with special forces experience to protect polling locations in my state. This was clear voter intimidation. Similar efforts are going on around the country, solicited by President Trump's false claims of massive voter fraud. So as a result of his claims, people are trying to get poll watchers, special forces people, to go to the polls. Judge Barrett, under federal law, is it illegal to intimidate voters at the polls?
Senator Klobuchar, I can't characterize the facts in a hypothetical situation, and I can't apply the law to a hypothetical set of facts.
She refused to affirm what is written in the Constitution, that Donald Trump, the President of the United States, does not have the right to postpone the elections.
July 30th, 2020, President Trump made claims of voter fraud and suggested he wanted to delay the upcoming election. Does the Constitution give the President of the United States the authority to unilaterally delay a general election under any circumstances? Does federal law?
Well, Senator, if that question ever came before me, I would need to hear arguments from the litigants and read briefs and consult with my law clerks and talk to my colleagues and go through the opinion writing process.
Now, you hear these days people increasingly saying, if Donald Trump steals the election, we should take to the streets. Well, get your ass to D.C. right now, or into the public square wherever you are, because Donald Trump is stealing the election right now with this confirmation hearing, and we have got to stop it. It's on us, the masses of people who do not want a fascist America. It's up to us to come into the streets to stop this, because during these confirmation hearings, something else was made clear yet again. Yet again, the Democratic Party has proven that they will not and they cannot fight Donald Trump and this fascist program and this fascist election theft the way it needs to be fought. For one thing, they showed up and legitimized these confirmation hearings. They legitimized a fundamentally illegitimate process. In advance, they refused to call into question anything about Amy Coney Barrett's fanatical Christian fascist beliefs and member in a cult-like fanatical Christian fascist organization for decades. They said they would respect her personal views. And sure, it's fine, respect people's personal religious beliefs, but call into question somebody who is proven and was appointed because they've been proven to view the law as an instrument to impose their religious views and their religious bigotry on everybody else through the power of the state. The Democrats let all that slide. They even let it slide when Amy Coney Barrett refused to state on the record whether she thought the Supreme Court decision that gave women the right to birth control was correctly or incorrectly decided. They let that slide. They didn't call it into question. They didn't make it a stop everything moment. But even more importantly, though they asked some important and some tough questions about this election theft, when Amy Coney Barrett gave stop everything answers, like refusing to endorse the peaceful transfer of power, the Democratic Party didn't stop everything. They moved the agenda, they kept going forward, they participated. And when these hearings were over, Dianne Feinstein, the highest-ranking Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, got up out of her chair, walked over, and gave a huge hug to that fascist Republican, Lindsey Graham, and told him this was the greatest confirmation process in history.
This has been one of the best set of hearings that I've participated in.
And thanked him.
And I want to thank you for your fairness and the opportunity of going back and forth. It leaves one with a lot of hopes, a lot of questions, and even some ideas, perhaps some good bipartisan legislation.
These Democrats are capitulating and collaborating with this fascist coup. Why? Because their whole strategy is to rely on the institutions and the very rules that Donald Trump is ripping up and shredding and remaking. They play by the rules as Donald Trump is shredding the rules, and they're telling you to play by the rules too. They are terrified of you coming into the streets and getting a sense of your own strength, your own power, of coming out and expressing your fury at this theocratic nightmare that is being imposed on us, this white supremacist regime that is being locked into place and unleashing mobs to kill protesters for Black lives in the streets and cheer for it. This regime that has put children in concentration camps at the border. They don't want you in the streets expressing your outrage. So they're telling you to play by the rules just like they're playing by the rules, because they don't want you to get a sense of your strength and your power, and that can get out of their control. And we saw this last summer. We saw how the people in the streets set our own agenda that they were compelled to respond to. The cries against institutionalized white supremacy, the outrage at what was done to George Floyd, and the deep questioning about the nature of this system in America, the system that the Democrats represent, even with all their differences with these fascist Republicans, to start asking deep questions. Like, what is it about this system that has kept its knee on the necks of Black people for 400 years, and what needs to be done to end this? They don't want you asking that. They don't want you fighting in these streets to stop this. They want you going along. But here's the thing, our interests are not the same as their interests, and we do have power. We have to come into these streets without their permission. We have to change the agenda. And when we act from below, we can compel them to respond to our demand. We did that over the summer, and we need to do that now. We need to pour into these streets here in D.C. and say no confirmation, no election theft, no fascist theocracy, and we need to stay in these streets, stopping this confirmation and building the strength in nonviolent mass outpourings that stay day after day, coming back, refusing to let Donald Trump steal this election and lock in a second term. Yes, we should turn out and vote in record numbers to defeat Donald Trump in the elections, but we better take deadly serious what he is telling you and what the Democrats refuse to take seriously, which is that he is unlikely to respect the outcome of the election alone. We've got to be in these streets. We've got to answer the call from refusefascism.org. That's what brought me to D.C. That's why I will be in these streets through this confirmation hearing saying hell no, and why you need to join me across this country and raise the demand. Trump, Pence, out now, and don't stop until it's realized. No one is going to do it for us. It's on us.
So that was Sunsara Taylor from Washington, D.C. in front of the Supreme Court. So heed her words. What she had to say was very important. And wherever you are, if you can get to Washington like she called for, get to Washington. Wherever you are, we need to stop this nomination from going forward, and we need to get prepared to drive out this regime and be in the streets every day from now through the election, and probably after the election it's going to be even more intense. But next I want to note that tomorrow is October 22nd, 2020, which will be the 25th year of the National Day of Protest to stop police brutality, repression, and the criminalization of a generation. 24 years ago when this started, it would have been hard to imagine where we are today. This is a moment of immense possibility, but also immense danger. The threat of the U.S. becoming a fascist state under this Trump-Pence regime is more real by the day. Federal forces have been kidnapping and even assassinating demonstrators on the U.S. streets. Demonstrators who were out protesting police brutality have been brutalized by the police and even murdered on the orders of the president. Organized acts of terror have been carried out by armed white militias, and open white supremacy has been promoted at every level of the government, and most especially from the highest office of Donald Trump. The first National Day of Protest to stop police brutality, repression, and the criminalization of a generation was proposed by the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian to our comrade Carl Dix, who went out and organized many different forces to become part of this, and especially focused on bringing forward and organizing 24 years ago the parents of those who were murdered by the police. And they formed the October 22nd Coalition, sometimes called the NDP, National Day of Protest Coalition, and they put out a call to wear black and take to the streets at a time when it wasn't that popular to do so. It wasn't the thing. But I remember school kids wearing black, classes where everybody organized and they wore black, and people in the streets all wore black for that day. And then through the presidencies of both parties, Democratic and Republican, October 22nd Coalition has raised its demand every year and shown the spotlight on this horrific scourge of this system, the murder of people by the police, innocent people. But today, there are two sharply opposed visions, very sharply opposed. On the one hand, there's the beautiful rising that took place in June and July and still continuing after the murder of George Floyd. People saying Black Lives Matter, young black people in the streets, young white people, Latino people, Native Americans in the streets saying together, Black Lives Matter. People have learned to say the names of those who've been murdered by the police and to reckon with the white supremacist foundation and the present reality of this country. And on the other side, the fascist Trump-Pence regime, whose response to this righteous rising has been law and order, which has meant the demonization and brutal repression and outright murder of those who've been protesting. From the very beginning of the October 22nd Coalition, my comrade Carl Dix has warned of a slow genocide of black people through mass incarceration as well as the police murder. But right now with this Trump-Pence regime, we could be facing a fast genocide. And that's why right now, the struggle for black lives to matter and the struggle, as I said earlier, of every group, of everybody in this society has to go through driving out this regime over the next 10 weeks. Hopefully sooner, but there's a ferocious struggle that's afoot. Every struggle has to go through this. And look, let me underscore this by the Trump-Pence regime is planning and working to do this fast genocide. Today in the New York Times, an op-ed appeared, the dystopian police state the Trump administration wants, by Philip Eitbagaf, who's a serious scholar. And this plan that these people are cooking up is as serious as the title of this article. And this should provoke everyone to take to the streets now and build the necessary unity, determination, and righteous stand in front of the world to demand the Trump-Pence regime out now. So what we want to do here on the RNL Show is encourage everyone to come out to 022, October 22nd on Thursday, which in some cities is going to be merged with the protest by Refuse Fascism demanding Trump-Pence out now. But where it's not, you should find their protests, go to them, and be out in the streets with the October 22nd Coalition. If there isn't one in your area, you should find one. You can find the information online. But on this show, on this dispatch tonight, we're going to honor this October 22nd, and those who've been killed by the police with a song by Janelle Monáe, Hell You Talking About, and ask you to look at the faces of the people, of the many thousands of people who were documented by the Stolen Lives Project of the October 22nd Coalition.
Eric Garner, say his name. Eric Garner, say his name. Eric Garner, say his name. Eric Garner, won't you say his name? Trayvon Martin, say his name. Trayvon Martin, say his name. Trayvon Martin, say his name. Trayvon Martin, won't you say his name? Sean Bell, say his name. Sean Bell, say his name. Sean Bell, say his name. Sean Bell, won't you say his name? Say his name. 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 Won't you say his name?
So to close out tonight's dispatch, we want to feature a reading by Lilly Wachowski, who, as I said earlier, is a co-creator of The Matrix, V for Vendetta, and Sense8, the series on Netflix. A reading of the pledge from Refuse Fascism to the people of the world in the name of humanity. We refuse to accept a fascist America. And earlier today, she wrote to the editorial board of Refuse Fascism a comment about why she did this, which I want to read to you. Quote, as an artist, as a trans woman, as a queer, I am actively engaged in the project of world building. My life has literally depended on it. I signed this pledge because I feel we are standing at a precarious precipice, and only by participating in this moment of acute potentiality, by rising in solidarity to refuse white supremacy and deny fascism, will we have a chance for any future at all. This is a moment of our making or unmaking. Unleash your radical imaginations, y'all, end quote. So with that, I give you Lilly Wachowski in the Refuse Fascism Pledge to the people of the world.
We pledge to stop a regime that imperils the people of the world and the earth itself. We will take to the streets day after day and call forth others. We demand Trump Pence out now. We will not stop until they're gone. We do not comply with a regime putting targets on the backs of black, brown, and native people, denying women control of their bodies. The criminalization and forcing LGBTQ and non-binary people back into the closet. We do not accept a society ruled by hate and bigotry, ignorance and brutality, demeaning and cursing other peoples and countries, and threatening them with destruction. There can be no more children torn from parents and locked in cages. No more fire and fury from the mouth of a demented bully with his finger on the nuclear trigger. No more mass COVID death from science-hating lunacy. No more law and order of official terror by bullets, batons, and tear gas. No longer can we live with howling mobs resurrecting Jim Crow, fascist thugs attacking our protests, the right to vote stolen by defenders of the Confederacy. We will not worship the flag or accept a theocracy. We will not become collaborators on a march to a racist genocide. We will not hand the future to scorchers of the planet. 4 more years, 4 more months, and it could be too late. Too late to change the course of history as the Trump-Pence regime sabotages the election and drags humanity to the edge of extinction. Here and now, we pledge to unite in our millions, rising together in nonviolent resistance to stop a great horror. We pledge to stay in the streets, overcoming fear and uncertainty until this American fascism is brought to a halt. We pledge our determination to prevail over a regime that imperils the people of the world and the earth itself. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America.
So if that pledge to the people of the world in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America, spoke to you, if you were moved by it, if it reflected how you feel, you need to be out in the streets this Saturday, safe distance, safe practices in these public protests, mass assemblies to demand Trump-Pence out now. In recognition of the fact that Trump is already stealing the election, we need to vote, but Trump will not be stopped just by voting. So we're going to get into this weekend. We hope to see you there. For us here at the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show, Sunsara Taylor will be in Washington, D.C. You can join her and the other people there from Refuse Fascism. The RNL show, the next episode, will appear on Monday morning, the 26th of October. So tomorrow, be out there at October 22nd, the 24th, be out in the streets, and every day be in the streets. It's that time, folks. So for myself, for Sunsara Taylor, for Luan, and the rest of the RNL crew, we'll see you on Monday.